If nearly every nation on Earth is drowning in debt, then who exactly is the world indebted to? Think about it. The United States owes over $30 trillion. The UK owes trillions. Japan owes even more relative to the size of its economy. Even the smallest countries, some you've barely heard of, are buried under obligations they can't realistically repay in 100 lifetimes. So if almost everyone is in the red, who's in the black? Is there a secret super wealthy country no one talks about? A shadowy banker in the sky? A global puppet master? You might think you know the answer, but the truth is far stranger, far more mundane, and far more troubling. Because the real creditor might not be a person or a country or even a government at all. And once you see how our financial system actually works, you'll realize this question leads to a much deeper one. What happens when the world owes money to something that doesn't really exist? To unravel this mystery, we have to go back before cryptocurrencies, before central banks, even before nations as we know them existed. Debt itself is older than recorded history. Ancient civilizations used clay tablets to track obligations. Medieval kingdoms borrowed from merchant guilds. Empires rose and fell based on who controlled credit. But around the early 20th century, something changed. A shift so subtle that most people alive never noticed yet, so massive that it reshaped global power forever. We created a system where governments don't just borrow money, they create it. Where debt isn't a temporary burden, but the foundation of the entire global economy. And behind this transformation were a handful of institutions and individuals whose decisions still echo through every price tag, paycheck, and national budget today. The founders of modern central banking, people like J.P. Morgan's, Circle in the US, the Bank of England's early architects, and the economists who believed that economies could be engineered like machines. Their idea was simple and also incredibly dangerous. If money could be created through debt, then debt could grow forever, or so they hoped. But the system they built intended to stabilize the world now barely keeps it from falling apart, and the unanswered question remains: if we created the debt, then who owns it? That answer becomes clearer when we follow the story chronologically. For most of history, kings and governments borrowed money the same way anyone else did directly from wealthy individuals or institutions. If they couldn't pay, they defaulted, and sometimes lenders lost their heads. But with industrialization came a new idea. Why not borrow from ourselves? Countries started issuing bonds, promises to repay with interest to their own citizens and to foreign investors. These bonds became safe investments, and governments became addicted to them. Then came 1913, when the United States created the Federal Reserve, one of many central banks emerging around the world. Their job was to stabilize currency, control inflation, and ensure financial continuity. But here's the twist. Central banks don't lend out money they already have. They create new money when governments borrow. So instead of borrowing from a wealthy family or nation, governments began borrowing from the future. Debt became the engine of everything: war, infrastructure, social programs, economic growth. The modern world was built on promises to pay later, but eventually later catches up. Fast forward to the late 20th century. Countries all over the world had discovered the magic trick. Debt fuels growth. Debt funds expansion. Debt keeps economies alive. And so, debt exploded. Countries lent to each other. Banks lent to countries. Pension funds bought government bonds. Central banks bought bonds from banks, and commercial banks created most of the world's money by issuing loans. The system became a web so interconnected that a single crash could ripple across continents in hours. Then, in 1971, the world entered a new era. When the US ended the gold standard, money stopped being tied to anything physical. It became symbolic. Abstract. A number on a screen. From that moment on, global debt skyrocketed beyond anything previously imaginable. Because there was no longer a natural limit. This leads us to the breaking point. Today, global debt is over $300 trillion, far more than the value of all goods and services the world produces in an entire year. Meaning even if every country used every dollar of economic output to pay back debt, it still wouldn't be enough. So how did the world get here? Because in our system, debt isn't a flaw. Debt isn't a flaw in the system, it's the product. Banks create money by issuing loans. Governments create money by issuing bonds. Central banks stabilize everything by buying those bonds. Investors rely on this cycle for safe returns. And as the world grows, it needs more debt to function. This is where the mystery breaks open. If every country owes money, and money itself is created through debt, then the real creditor isn't a nation or a billionaire. It's the system itself. The world owes money to its own financial architecture. But systems fail. We've seen that in 1929, 1973, 2008, and 2020 every major crisis was sparked by debt. And debt isn't just financial. It's geopolitical power. Countries that borrow cheaply thrive. Countries forced to borrow at high interest become trapped. That is where institutions like the IMF and World Bank step in with loans that often come with political conditions. The result, austerity, economic dependence, and sometimes national instability. The fallout is everywhere. Nations spend more on interest than on healthcare or education. Developing countries stay stuck in endless repayment cycles. Wealth concentrates among those who own the debt banks, funds, and large investors. And attempts to fix the system usually make things worse. Governments have tried everything: raising taxes, cutting spending, printing money, restructuring debt, negative rates, bailouts, austerity, even defaults. But none of it solves the core problem. The global economy depends on constant growth. And growth depends on debt. Stop borrowing. The system stalls. Borrow too much. The system collapses. We're stuck between two impossible choices. And today, the pattern is clearer than ever. Every major economy is in debt. Most countries borrow more than they repay. The US pays over $1 trillion a year in interest. Japan's debt is over 250% of its GDP. Global debt grows faster than global income every year. Yet the creditor is still the same. The future a system built on trust tomorrow will be bigger than today. But what happens if that belief breaks? Debt isn't a mistake. It is the system. We don't owe money to a hidden elite, we owe it to our own financial structure. And the danger isn't the debt. It's what happens if the world stops believing the structure will hold. The system works until the day it doesn't. If this helped you understand how global debt really works, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who still thinks government debt is just a number on a spreadsheet. Because the truth is far more complicated and far more important.